First of all, can everybody hear me? Is there any problem with the here? I have to tell you, because I have almost a neurotic worry about the sound. I'll tell you why. Believe it or not, in another lifetime, I wanted to be a rock and roll star. I'm not joking. And I have a disc on available once in a while. Actually, somebody buys it online at a site called cdbaby.com. I was like, in those days, was some people would remember what a folk singer. Okay, nowadays nobody even remembers what that is. But like Bob Dylan, this was my dream at one time. And in any case, I was a solo act, just voice and guitar. And what I used to do is I used to go, anytime I would see a solo act, I would go see and look and watch for their technique. One time I saw an incredible country singer. And this was maybe the best, one of the best, one man, one guitar acts I'd ever seen. After the show, I went to go talk to him. I wanted to get his advice. Anyway, it turns out the guy had been traveling around 8 years on the, what you call, I guess, the AAA country circuit for 8 years, living in the back of like a UPS type truck. That was his home for 8 years. He never quite made it to the big time. I don't know why. He was incredible. So I asked him for advice. And, okay, I promise this is what he said to me. He looked at me and he goes, "Son, your show begins and ends with sound system." That was it. I'm sorry, that's what he did. This is 8 years living in a truck. That's what he had. This still was. Now, the fact is, it may sound superficial. However, I found that rule as a performer was absolutely consistent. Okay, lousy sound system, lousy show. Great sound system, lousy show. So, anyway, that's why I'm not up here with the guitar. Anyway, if you go, if you end up going to my website, you'll see. You can click. There's a link to buy my disc if if you're so inclined. I want to thank Rabbi Karsh very much for did he go out? But at any rate, you'll tell him that I thanked him. I want to thank Mrs. Begon. Her son was nice enough to set this up. And you have a wonderful son, by the way. I'm sure you know that, but it's always nice to hear. He really is. I don't have to even pretend. He is a wonderful guy. Okay. The subject that we're going to be talking about, belief in God, particularly from a scientific point of view, happens to be, whether people admit it or not, it's always, I have found, it's always churning around in people's hearts and minds and intellects and souls, etc. There was I'm going to mention it a little more specifically during the talk, but there was an article in the Huffington Post, which is, for those of you who don't know, is a very popular online newspaper. Ariana Huffington just sold it for how much? $200 million. A very popular site. In any case, so there was a Rabbi Jacobs from Ashatara, New York, who wrote an article basically based on some of the material that he got from my book. He mentioned my name several times. And the religion section of the Huffington Post is not the most well-read part of the book, of that website. It happened within a few days. It had, there were 8,000 people had posted it to Facebook and said they liked it. Over 6,000, almost 7,000 people commented on it. There were some very, very you see people's passions came out both ways, who said that, you're crazy creationist, crazy fundamentalist, you're anti-science, and then of course you have people from the other side, yes, this is what we need, this, etc. At any rate, this is a subject that moves people. When Maimonides starts off his great work called the Mishnah Torah, the beginning of the first words are Yesod HaYesodot Va'omud HaChachmot, the foundation of all foundation, and the pillar of all wisdoms is to know that God exists. That's what he says. It's the beginning of everything. And whether it's on whether we're thinking about it consciously or not, when the subject comes up, it moves us. We understand this is what it's all about. And the clearer that we know God exists, or the fuzzier it is, makes a big difference to us. So anyway, I want to make sure that it's understood. I don't know everyone here in the audience what you believe, what you don't believe, but what I do want to make sure you understand is what we're not going to be talking about tonight. And sometimes this confuses the issue when these discussions and these kind of talks take place, particularly, like for instance, I spoke at several universities to the Secular Atheist Society of the college, okay? So it's very important to make sure you focus and define exactly what you're going to be talking about. We're not talking about here tonight how many days did God create the world. We're not talking about the story of Genesis or Bereshit. Is it true? Is it not true that it happened exactly the way it said? We're not talking about how old the universe is. We're not talking about did God split the Red Sea or not. That's not the subject tonight. We're talking about can life begin without a creator or not. That's the issue. Obviously, my point of view is that if you approach it scientifically, forget about whether you read the Torah, whether you have any particular religious beliefs, organized religion, if you will, you're going to come to the conclusion, if you're a rational truth seeker, that the only explanation for the existence of life is that there is a creator. So that's what we're talking about, nothing else. So let's not confuse it with any of the issues that have to do with belief in God or not belief in God. And at the end, when we have questions, that's the topic that we're going to really be discussing. Now, obviously, I'm an Orthodox rabbi, so I believe in all these things. I do believe that God split the sea. I believe that God spoke at Mount Sinai. But that's, in a certain sense, besides the point. You can believe in God and believe in creation without necessarily, believing in the Torah or believing in any other particular religion. The book is written not to as an advocate to advocate Judaism. The book is written to advocate belief in God, belief in the soul, belief that what a human being's life revolves around is seeking this transcendence, seeking transcendent morality, transcendent purpose, etc. Okay, not particularly about Judaism. The concept of God is a Jewish God, but it's not pushing people or it's not persuading people to go in that particular path. In any case, keeping those ground rules in mind so we can kind of proceed. Now, there's another very important point. We're going to be talking about origin of life, some of the science involved. The question is, why am I qualified as a rabbi to get up here and talk about this subject? You should be an organic chemist, a microbiologist. Why do I have any authority to get up here and speak about this subject? And the answer to this is it's a very important question, and the answer is even more important. The answer is that I don't believe that the essential issue is the science. The science, as we'll see, is relatively straightforward. I think that the real issues having to do with origin of life and the problems that people have believing in a creator does not have to do with science at all. It has to do with the existential realities of human nature and human behavior. And hopefully, those are subjects which conceivably could be within the purview of a rabbi. So keeping all that in mind, let's proceed. If we're going to talk about origin of life, from the viewpoint of the believer, we're obviously going to have to discuss what's commonly called the argument from design. Okay? Now, the argument from design, which is a very old discussion that people have been having. The Talmud records arguments between Greek and Roman skeptics and the rabbinic sages. These are 2,000 years old. So this is not a new discussion. But the argument from design is remarkably simple. However, it has been misrepresented as far as I'm concerned, and sometimes that causes confusion, as I will point out. The argument, very, very simple. What's the argument? The argument is the existence of this suit. I'm wearing a suit. The existence of this suit itself is the evidence that there is a tailor who made the suit. I don't need any other evidence to prove that there's a tailor. All you have to do is look. Okay, I know I'm not on the cutting edge of fashion, but still, here's a suit, there's got to be a tailor. The existence of a poem on a piece of paper is itself the evidence and the incontrovertible proof that there is a poet somewhere. The charge of the light brigade on a piece of paper means there is a poet. I don't need to know what he looked like. I don't need to know his name. I don't need to know what language he spoke. He obviously spoke English. That the thing itself is the proof. In other words, and this is the principle behind it, there are certain levels of design, sophistication, and functional complexity. Functional complexity means complexity that does something, not just a pattern that sits there on the wall. Functional complexity, like a machine that actually accomplishes something, and specified information. Information means that we've got names written on the wall there with their dates, with dates of death, etc., or you go into a bathroom and it says, you know, for a good time, call Mary. It doesn't matter. That is a piece of specified information, okay? There are certain levels of all these things beyond which or above which the human mind simply refuses to accept could have come about through any type of unguided process, okay? What that level is, in other words, what's the baseline, is really an interesting discussion, but it's not what we're going to talk about tonight. Certainly, my suit, the poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, a bicycle, okay? You know, that plaque, the information that's on that plaque there are well over the line. So those types of things, from time immemorial, human beings have assumed they are the product of intelligent intervention. They do not happen by themselves. Okay, so now, what about the simplest living organism? What about DNA? What about the complexity of a human being? A human being, the human body, as we can ask the doctor, if we got a room full of Jews, there's got to be doctors in the room. But, the complexity of the human body is at least as much as a bicycle. And of course, it's many more, there's more. So, the prima facie assumption is that it must have been the product of a designer, right? So now, I want to point something out to you. Obviously, not everybody agrees with it. There's a lot of people, a lot of skeptics in the world, a lot of atheists in the world. But I want to point something out to you. There is nobody, and I mean nobody, not the most diehard atheist in the world, whether it's some of you might have heard of like guys like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Bertrand Russell, a very famous atheistic philosopher. None of them, there is nobody who disagrees with the argument from design. And now we're getting into where sometimes there's confusion about this. I'm going to say that again. There is nobody, not the biggest atheist in the world, who disagrees with the argument from design. There is nobody who has any type of reasonable grasp on reality that would not admit that the existence of my suit is the evidence for the tailor who made the suit. You can't possibly deny such a thing. So the question is, then where do we disagree? Why does somebody deny the reality of the creator? Why does someone like Richard Dawkins, who is a highly accomplished biologist, write book after book denying a creator? The argument, the disagreement is not about the argument from design. Okay? The disagreement is, and this may sound like a subtle distinction, but it is a crucial distinction. The disagreement is not about the truth of the argument from design. It's undeniably true. The argument, the skeptic says, no, the argument from design applies to my suit. It does not apply to the world of living systems. You can make that argument for this. You can make the argument for the words printed on the paper. You can't make the argument, it doesn't apply to the earthworm. It doesn't apply to a human being. It doesn't apply to a dolphin. Okay? In other words, the skeptic will say the sonar of a submarine, obviously designed by an intelligent creator. The sonar of a bat, with which it can catch flies in pitch black darkness, a mile beneath the surface of the earth. No, that you can't apply the argument from design. The navigational system of an airplane, absolutely designed by an intelligent designer. The navigational system of a bird, there are certain types of birds that the new birds hatch and they fly. The parents have left already. The birds hatch, they fly 10,000 miles to the same nesting grounds every single year. They've never been there before. Obviously, they know how to navigate. You can't go 10,000 miles to a spot without a navigational system. That navigational system was not designed. How do they say it? How do they deny it? Okay. So this is the argument between the skeptic and the believer. The believer says the argument from design applies to living things. The skeptic says, no, it does not apply to living things. Why? Why doesn't it apply to living things? There are two basic reasons why the atheist or the skeptic says it doesn't apply. Number one is a philosophical reason. I'm not sure, for those of you who have heard of, there's a very well-known philosopher, Scottish philosopher, named David Hume. So there are skeptics who claim that his philosophy is enough to show that the argument for design does not apply to living things. Okay? And the second and the most important, of course, is Darwinian evolution. In other words, Darwinian evolution is a process that explains how we got these incredibly complex, systems in the living world, even though they weren't designed. So now, I want to very quickly move past these objections. Remember, these are the two reasons why the skeptic denies the argument for design applying to the living world. First of all, we're going to skip David Hume because the fact is that David Hume was almost totally out of fashion. There was a time when he was used in the question and answer period. If someone wants to bring it up, I'm more than happy. There is no scientist anymore who takes David Hume seriously. There's a few philosophers who are in their ivory towers on the university campuses. The scientists who actually see what's going on in the simplest living cell don't take David Hume seriously. Again, if someone wants to bring it up, please, questions and answers. The second one, of course, is much more important. That is Darwinian evolution. And we're going to move past Darwinian evolution just as quickly because, to keep things simple for the sake of argument, I'm simply going to concede the truth of Darwinian evolution. Okay? We're not going to deal with it. It's true. I don't even know if everyone in the audience I found that not everyone even understands anymore what Darwinian evolution is. But whatever it is, for argument's sake, we're going to accept it as true. Okay? I personally do not believe that Darwinian evolution actually explains the organized complexity of the living world. But we're going to concede. So the question is, you might think that, well, if I've conceded already evolution, then that's the end of the game. The fact is that what I'm going to try to show you, this is maybe one of the most important points, maybe the central point that's going to come out tonight. And that is that, contrary to popular belief, I'm going to demonstrate to you Darwinian evolution is completely irrelevant to the whole question of the existence of the Creator. That is not what the public's perception is. The public's perception is, and in the world of the academic, the perception is that, oh, Darwinian evolution, of course, you don't need God anymore. We've explained it naturally. It is absolutely, completely irrelevant to the question. Okay? How can I say that? Okay, let me explain how I can say that. Well, what does it mean when we say we have accepted evolution as a theory? It means the following. Darwinian evolution is based on random mutations in the DNA of a living organism. That when it reproduces, when it self-replicates, there are little copy mistakes in the genetic material. When you make a mistake in the genetic material, which is kind of like the computer program that directs the assembly of the particular organism, there's a little mistake. So the organism comes out a little different because the instructions are slightly different. Okay? Sometimes, by pure chance, these little copying mistakes give the particular organism a survival advantage, which makes it more likely that it will survive, or makes it more likely that this change will be passed on to its offspring. And over millions and millions of years, all the little changes add up, and from the simplest bacteria, here we are. Okay? That's the theory. So now, Darwinian evolution, listen very carefully, explains how you get from a living organism that has a DNA-based living organism, how it changes over millions of years. That's what it purports to do. However, what Darwinian evolution does not do, and does not even pretend to address, is how that first living organism got there in the first place. It works, again, this is the claim, it works once you get this thing in place. How did it get there? Darwinian evolution does not even talk about it. The discipline of Darwinian evolution is the field of biology. Biology, the study of living things. How did it get there? That's called origin of life research. It is a completely, totally different area of science The essential discipline of origin of life is not biology. It is organic chemistry and maybe microbiology or biochemistry. Because what origin of life has to explain, if you're coming from the viewpoint of an atheist, is how you get from inorganic chemicals to a living organism. Somehow that has to make that transition. That's not biology. Biology is only once it's alive. How do you get from non-life to life? That is the question. Now, if you think that's a simple question, it is not a simple question at all. The simplest living organism that anyone has, there's any evidence that ever existed, and before which there is no evidence that there was anything before that, is a form of bacterium. Okay? Now, a bacterium is a living organism. It's maybe measured in millions of meters, a millionth of a meter, the smallest bacterium. And it self-replicates with because it has a fully formed DNA system that that divides itself. Let me explain to you what is going on when you're in the simplest way. I'm not talking about from a very complex scientific way. The simplest scientific viewpoint, what's going on. And I'm going to quote not from a creationist or not from a believing Christian scientist. We're going to quote from one of the leading atheists in the world today, Richard Dawkins. Okay, who wrote a book called The God Delusion. It's a bestseller, sold millions. It's been translated, I think, into 30 languages. He is the high priest of atheism today, Richard Dawkins. This is what he writes about the DNA, the genetic material. After Watson and Crick, who were the people who discovered DNA, we know that genes themselves are living strings, listen carefully, of pure digital information. What is more, they are truly digital in the full and strong sense of computers and compact disks. The machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. Apart from differences in jargon, the pages of a molecular biology journal might be interchanged with those of a computer engineering journal. Our genetic system, which is the universal system for all life on the planet, is digital to the core. DNA characters are copied with an accuracy that rivals anything modern engineers can do. DNA messages are pure digital code. I'm going to quote Dr. Paul Davies, who is an atheist, a physicist, an expert in origin of life. He says almost the same thing. In a living organism, we see the power of software. Listen to the terms they're using. Or information processing refined to an incredible degree. The problem of the origin of life reduces to one of understanding how encoded software emerged spontaneously from hardware. How did it happen? How did nature go digital? And finally, Bill Gates, from his book, The Road Ahead. DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created. In other words, for though I don't know if the people who are involved in computers, in the DNA, which by the way, there's no such thing as primitive DNA. The DNA of the simplest bacterium works on this exact same code as our DNA. Obviously, it's a different code, and because our DNA produces us, and their DNA produces a bacterium. But the coding is exactly the same. It's just like, it doesn't matter which Windows program you're using, the operating program is all the same. So that's what he means when it says it's a universal digital code. Now I want you to keep something in mind. We didn't even know what digital code was until a few decades ago. Somebody knew about it 3.5 billion years ago, okay, when the first bacterium emerged. We're going to go on that assumption that we're going to deal with the standard scientific model that life emerged about 3.5 billion years ago on the Earth, okay? And the simplest, like I said, the simplest life forms that they've ever found are these bacteria, cyanobacteria. So that's number one. But what about the cell itself? That's the genetic code in the cell. What about the actual cell itself? Okay? I'm going to read to you also I'm going to bear with me as I read. I want you to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about trying to figure out how do you go from inorganic chemicals to a living organism. This is again Dr. Paul Davies and Dr. Michael Denton. These are not creationists. These are not people who advocate intelligent design theory. And I just want anyone to know, I don't quote anyone in my book, any scientist in the book, who is a proponent of those theories. Only people who are either atheists, agnostics, against intelligent design theory, those are the people that I use. I don't need to have people agree with me. I'm going to show you the people who disagree with me what they say. So this is Dr. Paul Davies and Dr. Michael Denton, who is an Australian microbiologist. The living cell is the most complex system of its size known to mankind. Its host of specialized molecules execute a dance of exquisite fidelity, orchestrated with breathtaking precision. How can mindless molecules, capable of only pushing and pulling their immediate neighbors, cooperate to form something as ingenious as a living organism? Scientists have fabricated invisible cogwheels, motors the size of a pinhead, and electrical switches as tiny as individual molecules. The burgeoning field of nanotechnology, building structures and devices measured on a scale of billions of a meter, promises to revolutionize our lives. But we should not lose sight of the fact that nature got there first. The world is already full of nanomachines. They are called living cells. Each cell is packed with tiny structures that might have come straight from an engineer's manual. Minuscule tweezers, scissors, pumps, motors, levers, valves, pipes, chains, and even vehicles abound. Although the tiniest living things known to science, bacterial cells, are incredibly small. Each is a veritable micro-miniaturized factory containing thousands of elegantly designed pieces of intricate molecular machinery made up altogether of 100,000 million atoms, far more complicated than any machine built by man and without parallel in the non-living world. Listen carefully. This is maybe the most fantastic thing of all. However, it would be a factory in which we have one capacity not equaled in any of our own advanced machines, for it would be capable of replicating its entire structure within a matter of hours. Let me explain to you what that means. It means we have machines that make replications. What are they called? Xerox machine. You go in, you get a piece of, you get your bank statement, you put it on the Xerox machine, and now I have 2 copies of my bank statement, and now I have 2 copies showing me how much money I don't have. But imagine going in a Xerox machine, right? Throwing into the room all the raw materials that go into, like some plastic, some wires, and et cetera, et cetera. You come back in an hour, 2 Xerox machines. The one Xerox machine created another Xerox machine. That's what self-replication means. We don't have any clue how to do such a thing. That goes on millions and millions of times a day within our life. That's what's happening here. So, when you talk about Darwinian evolution simply begs the question. In other words, the very best that Darwinian evolution can tell you is the following. Once you have in place an incredibly complex piece of machinery called a living bacteria, which has at its core an incredibly, fantastically complex, digitally encoded system with an encyclopedic amount of digital information encoded into it, right? Once you have that in place, the interactions between this organism and its environment, which we call natural selection, can produce all kinds of different types of living organisms. In other words, all varieties of life are possible if, and only if, this piece of machinery is in place. So how did it get there? How did it get there? Now, if you so that nobody here should think that only, let's say I'm a rabbi, somebody who has religious inclinations, has noticed this very, very big question, I'm going to read to you from an article written by Professor Thomas Nagel. Professor Nagel is a professor of law and philosophy at New York University. He is an atheist. He happens to be one of the more open-minded atheists. But he wrote an article, he wrote a review of Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. This is what he writes. He says like this. The entire apparatus of evolutionary explanation therefore depends on the prior existence of genetic material with these remarkable properties. We are therefore faced with a problem. We have explained the complexity of organic life in terms of something that is itself just as functionally complex as what we originally set out to explain. So the problem is just pushed back a step. How did such a thing come into existence? As it turns out, Darwinian evolution is not, as the skeptic would have us believe, a testimony to what can emerge from an undirected process. Darwinian evolution is not responsible for the complexity of life. Listen very, very carefully. Darwinian evolution is in a process which is a result of the staggering complexity of life. Darwinian evolution, assuming that it's true, all it is a testimony to is the incredible potential and the incredible capabilities that are contained in the genetic material of the first living organism. So, the question remains, how did it get there? And it's interesting that a man like Richard Dawkins, and again I keep referring to him because he is the leader of this whole new it's called militant atheism movement. He writes in his book, The God Delusion, he says like this: Darwinian evolution proceeds merrily once life has originated. But how does life get started? He asked the question too, right? I say, yeah, you're right, Professor Dawkins. How does life get started? So let's see what some of the, and actually Dawkins says, look, I'm a biologist. You know, that's not my area of expertise, but I'm sure the chemists will come up with an answer. This is essentially what he says. Let's ask the chemists. Let's ask the experts in origin of life research, how did life begin? Well, Dr. Stuart Kauffman. Dr. Stuart Kauffman is an atheist, a secular humanist, highly distinguished scientist at the Vermont Center for, what's it called? The Vermont Center, Vermont's Complex Systems Center. He writes like this. He's pretty straightforward. And by the way, you should know that the origin of life scientists are very open about this. It's not publicized, but it's very open. Stuart Kauffman. We do not, in fact, know how or where life started. There are several alternative views how life emerged on Earth, none established. Clearly, none of the theories above is adequate. And he goes even further. He says, anyone who tells you that he or she knows how life started on the Earth 3.5 billion years ago is a fool or a knave. Okay? Dr. Paul Davies. What stands out as the central unsolved puzzle in the scientific account of life is how the first microbe came to exist. How did something so immensely complicated, so finessed, so exquisitely clever come into being all on its own? The problem of how and where life began is one of the great outstanding mysteries of science. Many investigators feel uneasy about stating in public that the origin of life is a mystery, even though behind closed doors they freely admit they are baffled. Here's Dr. George Whitesides, who has the highest Hirsch index rating of any living chemist. The Hirsch index is a rating of how many articles and how many times he's quoted and how many other people refer to him. He had one of the leading chemists in the world today. He's at Harvard University. Here's what he said in a speech when he accepted the Priestley Medal for chemistry in 2007. It's like the highest level of highest award you can get in science, below a Nobel Prize. The Priestley Medal. He wrote like this. He said about the origin of life. He says, "How? I have no idea. On the basis of all chemistry I know, it seems astonishingly improbable." And the truth is, this is, in the book, I have 7 pages of quotes from the leading scientists in the world. They all say the same thing. And I'm just going to give you one more. Some of you might have, anyone who follows this subject, there was a conference at Arizona State University last month. They had leading some of the greatest scientists in the world, including Richard Dawkins. It was on the origin of life. That was the name of the conference. I think the conference was called The Great Debate, Origins, 2011. Arizona State University. It was last month, so this is up to date. John Horgan, who's a senior writer for Scientific American, he wrote with them for 12 years. He has a column on the Scientific American online site. This is what he wrote after the conference. This is the headline of the article. Okay, I don't even have to say what the article said. This is the headline. Psst, don't tell the creationists, but scientists don't have a clue how life began. You really don't have to say much more than that. Okay? This is a month ago. Now, and by the way, he is not a believer. He says, well, we'll figure it out. So in the end of the article, he says, well, at least they're trying, okay? The religious people just say God did it, but at least the scientists are trying to figure it out. But in any case, so now, where does that leave us right now? Remember, the skeptic does not deny the argument in design. The skeptic simply says, well, we have a reason why it doesn't apply to the living world. Darwinian evolution, right? No. Darwinian evolution is irrelevant. We just showed all Darwinian evolution can tell you about is what happens once you have life. So what are we left with? The suit is the proof of the creator of the suit. The poem is the proof of the creator of the poem. And the bacterium in its genetic code is the proof of its creator. That's all. That's where we're at. It's simple. It's obvious. Well, if it's that simple, then why doesn't Richard Dawkins come to shul and start davening, right? So, obviously, there must be some reason, right? He knows about this as much as I do. And this is where we shift gears a little bit. Okay? This is where we move from the science to what I told you in the beginning, to human nature and behavior. So, I want to ask you all a question. Who in this room knows who Kitty Genovese was? You know Kitty Genovese? You know Kitty Genovese? Where did she live?
Brooklyn, Manhattan.
We're calling New York. It was Queens, actually. Who else knows who Kitty Genovese was? How did she die? You don't have to go into.
She was.
Don't have to go into detail. Just
murdered.
She was murdered. Okay.
Many people.
Okay, so you know who she was. The truth is, I think everyone in this room knows who she was. You just may not know the name. On March 13, 1964, Kitty Genovese was murdered in Queens, New York, in front of her apartment building. And the reason why it's so the case was so notorious is that 30-odd people were watching from the apartment building when she got murdered. Okay? And nobody called the police. Now, I've heard some people say that this whole thing has been debunked, it didn't really happen. I don't really know. It's irrelevant to our story. The point is that the murderer was caught. There were plenty of witnesses, okay, to identify it. Even though if they didn't call the police, still much, much too late. I saw a documentary made about this case. And in this film, the name of the guy who was the murderer was named Winston Moseley. Winston Moseley was in prison. I think he might have been put in life in prison, I don't remember. But he's interviewed in this documentary, and in it he talks about killing this woman. He talks about how much he regrets what he did. He talks about how shocked he was because when he first stabbed her, he ran away. She wasn't dead. He ran away and hid, and he realized nobody's calling the police. It was sort of like almost like this animal instinct. He realized, hey, they're not coming. That means nobody's calling the police, and he went back and finished her off so that she wouldn't be able to identify him. He came back the second time. At any rate, that's besides the point. The point is, he says he regrets what he did. He's got a degree in prison. He wishes he could never did it. He seemed very sincere, by the way. But that's besides the point again. This is the point. The point is that after they show the interview with Winston Moseley, they interviewed his mother. Okay? And his mother proceeds to tell the interviewer, and we're watching, she says, my son is not a murderer. My son did not kill anybody. And she says, I know that he didn't kill him. I know he didn't kill him. I know it. And you know what? If I hadn't seen Winston Moseley actually talking about the murder, she was so clear and she was so obvious to her that she wouldn't have planted doubts in my mind. She was absolutely certain. Now, she said she knows he didn't commit a murder. Does she know he didn't commit a murder? Well, obviously not, because he did commit a murder. How can she know he didn't kill anyone when he did kill someone? But then, so why is she saying it? And the answer is obvious. The answer is that Winston Moseley's mother, her inner need to believe her son was innocent was much stronger than her desire for the truth. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to pass judgment on that. But every one of us understands. Her need to know, to see her son as innocent was much stronger than her need to know what the truth was. And I think that probably everyone here can recognize that all of us have this problem. All of us, and maybe sometimes when when you talk to people who are their younger days, they think, oh, no, I'm always totally objective. When you get to a certain point, you realize, you know what, I'm not always so objective. I sort of sometimes see things the way I like to see them, and it is a struggle. You need a tremendous amount of determination in order to really decide, I want the truth more than anything else. It doesn't matter what your profession is, it doesn't matter what your job is, whether it's in relationships. We all like to see things the way we would like them to be. And we have to struggle sometimes to see what reality is. What I am suggesting is very simply, and I'm going to try to back it up, and we're coming here to the close, and we will have questions, is that origin of life scientists simply don't want to believe in God. They do not want there to be a creator. Why? We could speculate. Whether it's because somehow it makes them feel that they are inadequate as scientists, whether somehow they feel that religious fundamentalists will take over the world. I don't know what's driving them. But it is not a matter of science. It is a matter of desire. They don't want it to be true, and therefore it's not true. Let me give you a couple examples, and then we'll open it up to questions. I want you to imagine, let's say, I don't know what everyone here believes. Imagine you're a skeptic, an atheist, whatever. And you say to me, Rabbi, how can you believe in the story of the flood of Noah? Scientific evidence shows that there was no flood, whatever it is. Okay, so let's say you have scientific evidence that you think contradicts me. And I say to you, oh, no. I'm not interested in that scientific evidence. I'm determined to find a religious answer to this question. I'm not going to take that route. I'm not going to listen to scientific evidence. Now, what would you think if I gave an answer like that? Is that an honest answer? Is that an answer of somebody who is basically just interested in their own agenda, is not interested in the truth? I mean, if you're going to be honest, you have to listen to if the guy says he has evidence and it makes sense, you have to confront it. You can say, this is the reasons I don't agree. But you can't just say, I'm going to reject it because I want a religious answer. That's silly. That's shutting your mind off. Keeping that and keeping what I just said in mind, I want to listen to this Dr. Robert Shapiro. I don't know if you notice all these scientists, a lot of them have Jewish names. It's probably surprised a lot of them too. In any case, Dr. Robert Shapiro, who happens to be one of the world leaders in origin of life research, he is professor emeritus of chemistry at New York University. This is what he says in his book. It's called Origins, A Skeptic's Guide to the Origin of Life. One favorite analogy of believers involves the discovery of a watch. We would not presume that this mechanism would come together from its parts by chance. It would function only if its components had been put together by a watchmaker. Similarly, the existence of bacteria and other living things, all of which are much more complex than a watch, implies the existence of a creator. He's talking about origin of life here, okay? He's a self-declared agnostic. Now, at this point, he almost sounds like Rabbi Shapiro, right? Listen carefully to the next line in the book. We will not take this escape route in our book, for we are committed to seeking an answer within the realm of science. Huh? He's committed. We're not going to take this route. I'm committed to finding a scientific answer. Now, I don't know if for those people who are listening carefully, this is what an outrageous thing for scientists to say. No, I'm not interested in what makes sense. I'm committed to finding a scientific answer. Doesn't he realize that it is just as foolish for a scientist to think that because he's committed to a scientific answer, that means that magically creates a scientific answer? Because he's committed, that means there is a scientific answer? What if there is no scientific answer? It is just as foolish for a scientist to do that as it is for a theologian to think that his commitment to finding a religious answer means that magically creates a religious answer. What are you supposed to be committed to when you're investigating anything? Are you supposed to be committed to a scientific answer? Are you supposed to be committed to a theological answer? You're supposed to be committed to finding the truth. What difference does it make? If someone is seeking the truth, for what possible reason would you care if it's a scientific answer or not? He does care. He doesn't want it. He wants it to be a scientific answer. And what he doesn't want to realize is what he's saying is, I don't want the truth. I want scientific. And if you think this is isolated, I'm going to give another 1 or 2 examples and then we'll stop. Jerry Coyne. Who here today heard of Dr. Jerry Coyne? Dr. Jerry Coyne is a very well-known atheistic biologist at the University of Chicago, a highly accomplished scientist. Now, when this article came out in the Huffington Post, he was kind of offended by what Rabbi Jacobs wrote, what I had said in my book, and on his blog, which is called Why Evolution is True, he took pot shots at me and Rabbi Jacobs. How embarrassed he is that we're these fundamentalist crazy rabbis. He thought that Jews took science more seriously, etc. He said, I'm glad I'm a cultural Jew. Literally, he put a giant picture of a giant pastrami sandwich on his blog. I'm glad I'm a cultural Jew. And this is one of my favorite, delis where I could get a big pastrami sandwich. Anyway, okay. The point is that this man is a scientist, no question. He has impeccable scientific credentials. Listen to what he says at the end of his attack on me and Rabbi Jacobs. Here he sums up his arguments. Listen very carefully. And if anyone wants to look it up, they can look it up themselves. I'll give you where to look on the internet. Quote, no, we don't yet understand how life originated on Earth, but we have good leads, and abiogenesis, which means life from non-life, is a thriving field. And we may never understand how life originated on Earth because the traces of early life have vanished. We know it happened at least once, but not how. We know it happened at least once, but not how. I'm pretty confident that within, say, 50 years, we'll be able to create life in a laboratory under the conditions of primitive Earth. But that too won't tell us exactly how it did happen, only that it could. Now, how a scientist knows something happened, and then admit in the next sentence that he doesn't have any evidence that it did happen, is a mystery that only someone like Dr. Coyne obviously can understand, because I certainly don't understand. I want you to imagine going before a judge, a district attorney, and he says, Your Honor, I know the defendant is guilty. I know he's guilty. So he says, Your Honor, what's the evidence? Well, the evidence, don't worry. In 50 years, we're going to have lots of evidence. Now, can you imagine saying such a... This is what he just said. We don't know, you're right, but I know it's true. And in 50 years, so, 50 years, we're both going to be, Jerry, did you find the answer yet? If that's if we're still around. Now, can you imagine that a scientist actually wrote such a thing? This is the same type of attitude. He does not realize even how ridiculous this is. And the weakness of his position obviously speaks for itself. Okay? And of course he accuses me of being anti-science. One more and then we'll stop. And this is from the like I said, the leader of atheism today, the most prominent atheist in the world, Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, and this will be our final quote here. Richard Dawkins had debates regularly with believers, believing scientists. He had a very interesting debate with a Christian mathematician by the name of John Lennox. This was in October of 2007. If you're into this stuff, Google Dawkins-Lennox debate. It was at the University of Alabama. Very fascinating to watch. This is what Richard Dawkins said at the debate. This is a verbatim quote. He said like this: I think that when you consider the beauty of the world, and you wonder how it came to be what it is, you are naturally overwhelmed with a feeling of awe, a feeling of admiration, and you almost feel a desire to worship something. I feel this. I recognize that other scientists, such as Carl Sagan, feel this. Einstein felt it. We all of us share a common kind of religious reverence for the beauties of the universe, for the complexity of life, for the sheer magnitude of the cosmos, for the sheer magnitude of geological time. And it's tempting to translate that feeling of awe and worship into a desire to worship some particular thing, a person, an agent. You want to attribute it to a maker, to a creator. This all sounds like Father Dawkins, right? Okay, so the question is, what stops him from taking that step? He means this. Richard Dawkins has an understanding of the living world that I certainly don't have. Maybe some of the doctors, the scientists in here do have that understanding. I don't. So then what stops him from worshiping his Creator? And he says, in his own words, what science has now achieved is an emancipation from that impulse to attribute these things to a Creator. It was a supreme achievement of the human intellect to realize there was a better explanation, that these things can come about by purely natural causes. We understand essentially how life came into being. We understand essentially how life came into being. Does everybody remember the old joke about Tonto and the Lone Ranger? Tonto and the Lone Ranger are surrounded by Indians, and the Lone Ranger says to Tonto, "Tonto, what are we going to do? We are surrounded by Indians." And Tonto says, "Who's we, paleface?" Right? We understand essentially how life came into being. Who's we, paleface? Is it Dr. Stuart Kaufman, who said that if anyone who says they know is a fool or a knave? Right? Was it Dr. George Whitesides, the one who said that, how? I have no idea. It seems to be astonishingly improbable. Who knows? Is it Richard Dawkins himself? And Richard Dawkins was interviewed in a movie by Ben Stein called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. It was on the subject of this talk. Here's the interview. Ben Stein. Well, how did it start? Dawkins. Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life. Stein, what was that? Dawkins, it was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule. Stein, how did that happen? Dawkins, I told you I don't know. Stein, so you have no idea how it started? Dawkins, no, nor does anyone else. It is only the fact that he is able to live this self-deluding view of reality. And this is in the book. I give example after example after example. It is only the fact that he is able to live this self-deluding view of reality. And this is in the book. I give example after example after example. If you saw a smiley face in the sand with the words, "Good morning, Professor Dawkins," next to it, you would know that there's somebody around who drew it. Why would you think that a bacterium should be any different? In my opinion, the search for the naturalistic origin of life is the search for the Holy Grail. It is the search for the fountain of youth. It is people who are desperately, for whatever their motives, I'm not going to speculate on, do not want to believe in a creator. They want to believe they can understand everything. And I think that what's called for here is a little bit of humility. Anyway, at this point, I think we've arrived at what for me is the most important part of the evening. I hope that you enjoyed it, and now I'm perfectly ready to answer your questions.
I'm an engineer. I 100% agree with you. I think one of the things that scientists try to do is get this satisfaction of understanding. And it's the point that you said right at the end. But a tailor, you can understand that. There's this person, this physical being that we call a tailor. I think what happens is when they take everything back and say, well, there must have been a creator to have gotten this started, that's a very unsatisfactory answer to them because it's not concrete. And maybe that's why they have a hard time.
It could very well be. But you know what? That's the nice way of saying it. The not nice way of saying it is that it's a form of arrogance.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. So, unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
I can accept that. I can accept God as a creator, God as a prime mover.
Right.
But I have a problem when, if God has no beginning and no end, was God dormant 4 billion years ago? And if so, what caused God to start creation?
Right. That's a slightly different topic. It's a very important question. I'll try to, we can talk about that for the next 2 hours. But remember, time, space, matter, and energy came out of nothing. This is not, even though this is what Jews have always said, this is the current theory in physics also. That's what the Big Bang means. That it came out, it's called a singularity. It happened once. It came out of nothing. Right? Now, listen very carefully. What was before the Big Bang? No. There was no such thing as before the Big Bang. And this is not just me, this is physicists. Time started. There was no time. There's no such thing as before. There was no time. Time before and after is only when there's time. See, time is a thing. This is what Einstein showed. Time is an actual thing. It's not like there was no such thing as before the Big Bang. Well, then what? The idea itself makes your mind kind of flip. Well, where did it happen? It didn't happen anywhere. There was no space. What do you mean no space? A void is void, endless amounts of... No, there was no space. There was nothing. What do you mean there was nothing? The more you think about it, it can make you a little crazy, actually. In fact, this is why our sages say, don't think too much about what was before, what's going to be after, what's above, and what's below. In other words, realize there is a limit to human understanding. And this is, you've reached the limits. The only thing we know about God, ultimately, again, I know this is a very short, inadequate answer, but at least it's sort of, an approach. The only thing we know about God is that He is something totally other than we are. Anything we can conceive of, that's not what He is. He is other than we are. And not only that, I want to point something out also. People think that they say, well, God is spiritual. God is not spiritual. God created the spiritual. He Himself is not spiritual at all. He's something else than spiritual. What? Don't know. Except that He's there. How do we know He's there? Here we are. There's the bacteria, there's the genetic code, there's the digital code, right? That's God, the Creator. How do we know God acts in this world and is concerned with mankind? Ultimately, that's what the Jewish people are here for, to show that God is working history, God is working mankind. It's another topic, and I'm just giving you sort of the chapter head. That's how we know God actually works. And He didn't just make a creation and now He's stepped back and divorced Himself from the world. The history of the Jewish people shows that God is very involved in the world. So maybe we'll have to talk about that next time. Anyway, yes?
When I was younger, and I was in college, I studied Kant. And Kant gave me like artillery to debunk faith. Because I was much more interested in debunking where I came from than in the truth. And Kant gives the ammunition that just because something, cause and effects, applies in the physical world, does not mean that that's how it works in the ontological world, which is the first move. Right. It doesn't have to necessarily, just because something applies here in time and space as we understand it, in the bigger picture, maybe it doesn't apply. Well, you could wait around, and you have your 80 years, or your 70 years, or your 90 years, to wait to see if Kant's right or wrong, or you can decide that you want to live your life the best possible way, and just, if you want understanding, the Torah gives you understanding. But ego stops scientists. And to me, it's simple. Ego has stopped people from Pharaoh on into believing that Hashem is the creator. Hashem lays it out. This is how you're supposed to live. People, if they haven't found it on their own, it's not invented here. If I didn't invent it, if science doesn't invent it, I don't want to hear it. It doesn't address my emotional needs.
I happen to agree with you, and I see it over and over.
This is not a complicated matter. I mean, people forever have put their own ego first. Hashem's rules are a pain in the neck. It stops you from murdering, from adultery, licentious behavior, gluttony, all the things that people really want to do.
Right, and another one of the very famous atheists who had a bestseller, who was very popular, was a guy named Christopher Hitchens. He calls it, he says, why would anyone want to believe in God? It's like living in a celestial North Korea. That's what he says. And what's ironic is that, why does he say celestial North Korea? Because that's the greatest example of authoritarian repression is North Korea, right? North Korea happens to be one of the few officially atheistic regimes on the earth today. So, it's odd that he would say such a thing. Because he has a book, his name of his book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. But what's the worst place on earth, North Korea, an officially atheistic regime? It's kind of strange. Yes, please.
What was, first of all, your argument is compelling, and most of the people here probably agree with it, but what was your motivation for the book? Because to the Orthodox and to most people, they'll agree with you, but do you hope to change minds? I mean, have you been getting emails from your readers saying, "Oh wow, I'm on your side now"? You know, I just don't know what's your goal.
I'll tell you, that's a very interesting question. But very briefly, first of all, I've been teaching about this. I've had an obsession with it for many, many years. Okay, so I've been teaching this thing, and certainly I think been helpful for people, many people over the years, to help them come to this realization. I obviously don't force people. I try to present them with the ideas and let them think about it and make a decision for themselves. But the motivation for writing the book is that I really believe, that's why I call the book "Nonsense of a High Order: The Confused and Illusory World of the Atheist." Nonsense of a high order was a phrase that was coined by a very distinguished British scientist by the name of Sir Fred Hoyle. He was an astronomer, a mathematician, a physicist, an incredibly brilliant man. And he, later in life, he was an avowed atheist most of his life. Later in life, he started investigating the issue of origin of life. And the more he investigated it, he started writing about it, and he said the idea that a living cell and all its enzymes, the thousands of enzymes, and the genetic code could come out of a primordial swamp without anyone, with an unguided process. He said it's nonsense of a high order. It's just ridiculous. So when I saw that phrase, I said that's going to be the name of the book. The reason I wrote the book was primarily, number one, I don't know if I'm going to convince atheists, the die-hard atheists. Maybe I will, some maybe I won't. The first thing is that these people affect us, but even more, where their biggest influence is on the university campus. Because many times you have young people who think there's something very kind of exciting and irreverent about being skeptical and believing in atheism, and they are taken in by this nonsense. They really are. And they think it's very cool. I'm sure there's a lot of guys, maybe girls who say, "I'm an atheist. I don't believe in it. It's not religious nonsense." So, they think that it's going to be very attractive. So this is where the biggest effect is. So first of all, I want to strengthen the people who believe in God. They shouldn't feel bullied. Because, by the way, this is something that the general public isn't aware of. There are academics who are being fired if they do not toe the line in terms of Darwinian evolution and origin of life stuff. They get fired. There's been some very sort of high-profile cases. The University of Kentucky, where they had a series of emails where basically they said, "No, we're not going to hire this guy." They said he's the most qualified. He's a world-famous astronomer, but he has said some things that he has doubts about Darwinian evolution. He was not fired. They just settled the lawsuit with them. There was a guy from NASA who was just fired because of his belief in intelligent design theory. So I'm saying that this is, it's affecting people. Not only that, the basis, and this is another section of the book, the basis of ultimately all moral ideas. What do you want your children to believe? That we are created in the image of God, and you have to treat people and act to them as if they are created in the image of God, or you should treat people as if they are glorified bacteria, as if they're a glorified cockroach. You're a tuna fish that happen to sprout legs because you had some lucky mutation. If you, by the way, we think you're laughing, but if you teach somebody that, eventually, well, if he's a bacterial, why should I treat him like a bacterial? And if we had time, we could go into when this is actually affecting our society. It is. These are dangerous, dangerous ideas, and we have to fight them. So anyway, that was the motivation for writing the book, and hopefully we will emerge victorious. Yes.
I remember reading 5 to 2 years ago that a live virus was manufactured synthetically in the lab from inorganic and organic chemicals. I remember the name of the virus was tobacco mosaic virus, whatever that is. I know a virus needs the cells to reproduce, but is that anywhere on the way? Is that?
Oh, I think this guy, a very famous scientist by the name of J. Craig Venter, they built a bacterium from they didn't build it from total scratch, but from basic genetic material. But yeah, they essentially have already, good portion of the way, of actually creating synthetic life. So I'm not sure what you're asking.
So my
what that
question
shows
is
is
in the lab, if you take inorganic chemicals and organic chemicals, but
Oh, yeah, in other words, what it shows,
somehow you get a live
what it shows is this.
virus. Is
Right.
that creating?
What it shows, forget about a virus. A virus can only survive inside a living organism. We're talking about a bacterium itself. What it shows is really very simple. Is that if you get the most brilliant scientists in the world with cutting-edge lab equipment, right, with millions of dollars at their disposal, and with a host of assistants and building up all the knowledge of all the brilliant scientists before, we are coming close to actually creating life. Well, how did the first life get to it? In other words, you see that you can't do it without the greatest minds.
Right.
And all they're really doing is copying what they saw before.
Well, they were trying to copy the primordial, the chemicals that...
Oh, no. If you're talking about experiments where they just dump chemicals and see what happens, they get absolutely nothing. You end up with zero. You end up with a gunk. Now, I'm serious. That's what you...
I don't know how they did it, but I do remember the name of the virus. It was
Well,
tobacco mosaic.
Yeah, they constructed it. They manufactured it.
It didn't come out of nothing. The point is, can they make something out of nothing?
What they can do is, if they can manufacture things,
But there's something...
which of course is manufacturing. That's what we're saying. You can't get light without an intelligent process. Somebody guiding it. It doesn't happen by itself. Here's what I'm going to do. I'll take one more question, then we'll stop. I'm happy to answer questions. I'll be back there if anyone wants me to sign a book. Yes, please.
Ask any question. Could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Could I suggest to you in this group that evolution is not something created by Darwin, but observed by Darwin, and that evolution is in fact God's favorite tool? Torah can be seen, I think, as, among other things, a field book of guided evolution. Think of the many destructions of peoples who were substandard in God's view.
Right.
Okay? I don't think we're talking about two different things. And I think that's the only part of what you say that bothers me. It's all one. Science is not about destroying religion or anything else. Science is about learning. And that's what Judaism is supposed to be proud of, is learning.
Right.
We can learn how God did things. We now know things that help us to save lives of our friends. So knowledge can be useful. And that's the thrust of most of the scientists I've ever worked with, is what can I do that will benefit? Not Wall Street. That's why very few scientists make a lot of money. But the beauty of Darwin's observations can be seen today. The way it works requires long spans of time. None of us live long enough to see the whole thing, but we can see moments of it. Right. And it is God's method.
Well, two things. First of all, personally, I done a lot of work on studying evolution. I don't really think that. I don't really think that, except for the small changes, it really is true. And there's a lot of people who agree with that. Now, but that's not my fight. Whether or not it took place, you're saying that God guided evolution. If that's what happened, that's fine. I'm saying that by itself, I think it's almost ridiculous to actually believe that all this stuff could have happened through an unguided process. It just doesn't make any sense. So if God guided it, then okay, that's fine. I have no problem with that. And I don't think that, that is one valid, I think, maybe view within the Torah. I don't think most people hold that way, but I have no problem with that at all. I have a problem with a scientist who says that evolution somehow excludes God from the picture, which I think is just ridiculous. So that's...
I haven't met any such scientists.
You are talking to the right scientist. You didn't talk to Jerry Coyne, let me tell you that. Yeah, this is, in the scientific world today, if you mention that you don't believe that Darwin evolution can happen completely without God, with no one directing it, you're going to be in big trouble. And anyway, okay, we're going to stop. I thank you very much. I appreciate it.